Daniel Dennett is Austin B. Fletcher Professor of Philosophy at Tufts University. His books include Consciousness Explained, Darwin's Dangerous Idea, and Freedom Evolves. I interviewed him at his home in Massachusetts. Okay, well, first of all, Dan, thanks for taking the time.
You're welcome.
I'm looking forward to talking about consciousness and evolution and free will, each of which you've devoted at least a book to. I wanted to start off, though, with this crusade you've gotten involved with lately on behalf of a group called Wright.
Now, interesting use of the word crusade. Yes.
Well, a lot of people are doing it these days.
Yes.
Sometimes it's ill-advised.
Yes.
In this context, I think it's fairly harmless. But Brights in this context are not smart people, but it's a term that's now being used to refer to people who reject supernatural explanations.
That's right.
And I guess loosely speaking, you could say that they tend to be either agnostics or atheists.
Yeah, that's right.
And you've said, quote, "The time has come for us Brights to come out of the closet and to demand bright rights." So, for starters, I'll let you come out of the closet as clearly as possible. Would you call yourself an atheist or an agnostic?
Well, I don't like the term atheist because it usually means somebody who's going around upbraiding people and trying to force them to listen to his arguments for why there is no God. I don't think there's a God, so I'm an atheist, but I don't make a deal of it. I think it's not that I passionately believe there is no God. It's that, of course there isn't a God, but so what?
So the difference in your mind is not one of how confident you are that there's not a God. I mean, you're 100% sure there's not a God.
100%. Am I 100% sure of anything?
Okay.
I'm as sure of it as I am of anything, yeah, I guess.
Okay. But not 100%. I mean, the reason I ask is because that version of atheism has always struck me as in some technical sense logically indefensible, right? I mean...
You can't prove a negative.
Right.
I think it was Bertrand Russell once said he couldn't prove that there was not a teapot orbiting Mars.
Right.
So he's a teapot agnostic. I'm a teapot agnostic with regard to God, too, I suppose. I can't prove that God doesn't exist.
Right. And what are you...
For one thing, the reason I can't prove that is that apparently no two people mean the same thing by God.
Right.
And some people, what they mean by God is nature. Well, that exists, and they worship nature.
Right.
So do I, in a way. Does that mean I believe nature is God? Well, who knows?
Yeah.
It's not supernatural.
Okay.
It's wonderful as all get out, but it isn't supernatural.
Okay. And do you feel you're missing anything? I mean, do you wish you could believe in God? Is there no void in your life?
No. In fact, I think that's actually a much more interesting question to ask most people. Or actually, it's hard to ask them because they don't want to answer it. I have a feeling that not that many people actually believe in God. Many people believe in belief in God. That is, they think it's a good thing, and they try to believe in God, they hope they could believe in God, they wish they could believe in God, and they say they believe in God. They go through all the motions, they try very hard to be devout, and sometimes they succeed, and for periods of their lives they actually do, in some sense, believe that there's a God, and they think they're the better for it. Otherwise, they behave like people who probably don't believe in God. Very few people behave as if they really believe in God. A lot of people behave as if they believe they should believe in God.
Well, how would you behave if you believed in God?
You would perhaps, and some people do this, be prepared to take what other people would call suicidal risks because you believe God is going to be there to save you. You would be prepared to give away everything that you own because God commanded you to do it, and so forth.
Well, yeah, although there you're actually talking about a specific conception of God.
Yeah,
Not
right.
Any conception of God that would make you think you could take risks without fear of death.
No.
And I guess that's...
Well, that's one of the problems with belief in God, is that it is so amorphous and undefined. It's not like
well, no,
believing in
there are different
helium or believing...
What I'm saying is there can be different definitions.
Oh,
it may
sure.
also be amorphous, but I'm just referring to the problem of there being...
Sure, many different definitions.
Right.
So.
But along those lines, you're rejecting also the idea of kind of higher purpose of any kind?
Higher than our purposes? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And on the question of evolution, I think you and I agree that evolution has, in a certain probabilistic sense, a kind of direction. That is to say, natural selection, once it acquired much momentum, was likely to produce diverse forms of life, increasingly complex life, and even properties like intelligence were not at all unlikely, even if there was no predicting which lineage would lead to them, and so on.
Yeah.
So you do believe evolution was kind of headed somewhere?
Headed somewhere.
But not by design.
But not by design, and not guaranteed to get there in any finite stretch of time.
Well, right. Yeah, bad things can happen.
My favorite image of this is if you think of going up being the sort of rise in complexity up to intelligence and so forth. Yes, this is what we've seen. But of course, at any moment it could just crash.
Sure.
But then it would go up again and crash and go up again, and we'd have a sort of sawtooth. But yes, that the trend is in some sense up, that there is progress in design. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And is it inconceivable to you that, I mean, you can imagine how someone could have a strictly materialist conception of natural selection, as I do, believe in the directionality that we just discussed, as I do, and still think that it's possible that there is some larger purpose unfolding, or that natural selection actually was the product of design. I mean, you can imagine being basically a materialist and still thinking that it's subordinate, natural selection subordinate to some larger purpose we don't understand. There actually was a designer of natural selection in some sense.
Yes, I can imagine that in some loose sense.
Okay.
I don't know that that's a coherent idea, but it's not obviously incoherent.
And you certainly don't buy it in any event.
I don't buy it. No.
Okay. Let me suggest that there's actually ways you could appraise that hypothesis. In other words, there could be evidence for it or evidence against it.
Yeah.
And let me...
There could. I agree.
Okay, let me be clear that I'm using design in a very loose sense. But I think you and I would agree that you can speak of individual organisms as being designed, at least in quotes, but not by an intelligent being, by a process of natural selection.
Absolutely, yes.
And that process imbues them with what you might call purpose or goal.
Absolutely. As real as purpose could ever be.
You mean getting genes into the next generation?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. That's the criterion of their design.
Yeah.
Now, there's a famous episode in intellectual history that inspired Richard Dawkins to call his book The Blind Watchmaker, involving this long dead theologian William Paley. Mm-hmm. What happened was, he argued, he said, look, you can look at living forms and tell that there's a God. It's like if you're walking through a field, you pick up a watch. Obviously, it was designed to do something. It's functionally integrated and so on. He said, look at animals. It's the same way. You can tell there's a God. Now,
I agree.
He was right that there had to be a process of design, right?
Absolutely right.
Okay. Now, here's among the things that I think you would agree are evidence in favor of that hypothesis. If you watch an animal grow from a single germ cell, there's a directional growth toward functional integration at higher and higher levels of organization.
Well, maybe. I'm not quite sure I like that way of putting it, but I think I see what you're getting at.
Okay. I mean, there is that, as a matter of fact. You do observe that in the life of an organism, and we actually know...
You have many more brain cells before you're born than you do shortly thereafter. There's a tremendous pruning. Is your brain more complex before you're born or after you're born. Development is not all in the direction of greater integration or greater complexity. In some regards it's simplification.
Much greater functional differentiation.
Much greater functional differentiation, certainly.
And integration, and correspondingly functional integration of differentiated things.
Yeah, sure.
And it gets bigger, and it develops a nervous system and so on, and these coherent functional things.
Yeah.
I would submit that if you step back and observed life on this planet in time lapse, including not just the evolution of human beings, but the cultural, including technological evolution that led to where we are today, the process would look remarkably like that. And in fact, you yourself, in your most recent book, I noticed, Freedom Evolves, you say there's a sentence something like, the planet is finally growing its own nervous system, us. And it's true. I mean, it looks like that, right?
Yeah,
and there
absolutely.
is a functionality about it. And you agree there's been a directionality about it.
Yes.
So it seems to me that to the extent that's the case, that argues, maybe strongly, maybe tentatively, maybe barely, who knows, but that is some evidence in favor of the hypothesis that natural selection in some sense is a product of design, in some sense may have a purpose.
No, I don't think that's a good argument. I think that remains an open possibility, but I don't think that the evidence that we have before us gives us any particular reason to think that it's more likely than not. Since the alternative hypothesis, namely that natural selection happens because it can happen, and that's it. Not because it was supposed to happen, and not because there's a purpose to it. It happens because it can, and since it can happen, all of the design accrual that is the mark of natural selection happens. It happens. That's all you can say.
Well, it certainly follows that it will happen if you have self-replicating material and finite resources and so on. But A, it didn't have to be the case that there was that on this planet. In fact, it's still a little bit of a mystery how it came to be. B, all I'm really saying is, look, you can imagine natural selection unfolding, Stephen Jay Gould could have been right. It could be directionless and aimless, and 99 times out of 100, nothing intelligent evolves, nothing complex evolves. But I'm saying that, and if you compare that scenario with the alternative, which you and I both believe, that there actually is a probabilistic direction toward complexity and intelligence.
I don't think that's inconsistent with the claim you just made that 99 times out of 100, nothing intelligent evolves.
Well,
that's probably true too.
Well, but you agreed that there is a probabilistic direction. I thought you said earlier, actually it was likely to lead to greater complexity and intelligence.
No, over the long run,
well, that's
yes.
what I mean.
But in the same way that most of the organisms that have ever lived on this planet died childless, and most of the lineages that have ever started off are extinct.
Right.
And so much more than 99 out of 100 of the lineages that have ever evolved have extinguished themselves without ever leading to intelligence. So intelligence is the rare thing. Yes, but it's still, give it enough time, it's very likely to be created.
But I mean, I think that works in favor of the argument I'm making. I mean, first you said tons of organisms die childless, right? And yet you agree that they were designed by natural selection to create offspring.
Yes.
The fact that some of them don't do it doesn't rule out that possibility. Secondly, the fact that lineages go extinct, well, that's true in epigenesis as well. If you look at the cells that you started out with, tons of them go extinct, and what goes on inside your body is more like a process of natural selection than a lot of people realize.
Yeah.
And one thing it has in common with natural selection is that although certain properties are very likely, I was very likely to wind up with eyesight, eyeballs, it wasn't at all inevitable which of my stem cells would be the grandfather of the lineage that led to the eyesight. And that's also true of natural selection. So I'm just saying that to the extent, I mean, I think we've agreed that observing what is it, ontogeny, I guess is the term, or, development of an organism, that it has its directional movement toward functionality by design, and that's in fact the hallmark of design. Would you agree that to the extent that that evolution on this planet turned out to have comparable properties, that would work at least to some extent in favor of the hypothesis of design? To some extent, to any extent.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, I'll declare victory and go home.
Okay.
Now we can talk about something else.
Okay.
Because after that, it at least becomes an empirical question and something you can argue about.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we only have one case to study, whereas when you're looking at individual animals, you have many more. Your book on free will, you're framing the issue of free will in a very, what will strike most people as an unusual way. People usually think of free will as opposed to determinism. Of course, by determinism, we mean the idea that basically the future of this universe is inevitable because the universe is this mechanistic thing. It works according to rules. And in principle, if you understood everything about the state of the universe and everything about the rules that govern it, you could predict what happens tomorrow. And that includes people's brains. They're deterministic. And so free will is kind of an illusion because of determinism, because of the truth of determinism. That's the argument, traditional argument against free will.
That's the traditional argument, yes.
You're saying, I think you're saying that actually the two are compatible in some meaningful sense of both terms.
Absolutely compatible,
okay.
Yes. So I'm just a compatibilist. There have been compatibilists for hundreds of years. But I'm a little different from most of the earlier compatibilists in that I want to deny flat out a premise that you started with, that you mentioned yourself just a minute ago. You said the future is inevitable if determinism is true. First of all, I want to say that phrase, the future is inevitable, just doesn't mean anything. We can't talk it. The future is going to happen, whatever it is. And that's true whether determinism is true or indeterminism is true. There's going to be a future. Now, in what sense could you talk about the future being inevitable? I don't know. What we have to talk about is particular events being inevitable, or particular types of events. And in order to see what the word inevitable means, you have to take it apart. And oddly enough, although the word trips off the tongue of everybody who writes about free will and determinism, hardly anybody's ever looked at it. But of course, what it means is unavoidable. I mean, evitable, inevitable, avoidable, unavoidable. That's all the word means. But now, to avoid something, this is something that an agent does, an avoider.
You don't mean a literary agent here.
No, I mean like
although sometimes they avoid.
Sometimes they avoid. No, I didn't have literary agents in mind. I had or secret agents. Although those are both agents. I mean agent in the broad sense of being an actor that has some sensory capacities and some goals, and that acts in the world to accomplish its ends.
Okay.
Now, are there agents that can avoid things? Sure. Tons of them. And in fact, the reason you have to look at free will from an evolutionary point of view is that's remarkable. That there are agents that avoid things is a remarkable fact. And there's many more avoiders now than there used to be. And they're much better at avoiding than they used to be. And in fact, it's as good as a definition of intelligence to be an expert avoider, to be able to foresee far into the future, to see things coming down the pike, and to take steps in a timely way to prevent those bad things from happening, and in order to foster things that you want to happen. We don't have a good parallel word. What would it be? Enhancer, probabilifier. There's no. We avoid harm, and we try to get the good. But there isn't a single verb for what we do with regard to good things the way there is for avoiding the bad. But now, that means that the whole concept of inevitability gets its meaning from the perspective in which a perspective in which there are agents, that might want to avoid something. And it might be in their power or it might not. Now if we start looking at particular worlds with particular agents and particular circumstances in them, we can now start saying, well, in this world, what things are avoidable? What kinds of things are avoidable by this agent, given its powers and its circumstances? And the answer may be, well, if you throw a brick at it, it can duck, because there's enough light so it'll be able to see the brick, and its nervous system is good enough, and its reflexes are fast enough, so that it's pretty good at avoiding bricks. However, random lightning bolts is no good at avoiding those. It's just doomed. If there's a lightning stroke coming up in its future, it's toast. There's nothing it can do about that. But if you try, to throw a spear at it or something, your chances of succeeding are next to nil, because it's such a good spear avoider. Now, in order to be able to talk this way, in order to partition the universe into the things that are inevitable for that agent or evitable by that agent, we have to have a way of talking about evitability and inevitability in a deterministic world. Now, since there's plenty of evitability in deterministic worlds that we can define, the implication, determinism implies inevitability, is just false. It's just a mistake. It's thousands of years old. It's not been pointed out. It's just a mistake.
So natural selection creates harm avoiders.
Natural selection is an explosion of evitability. We've had huge increases in the degrees of freedom. Mm-hmm. The powers that the products of evolution have, the accrued powers, this is one of the most obvious facts in the physical world. Mm-hmm. It's this growth of evitability. Now, if you look at evitability in that way, then you see that just the traditional philosopher's notion of inevitability just isn't in the same picture.
And you could say that we are future alterers, at least in the sense that, had we not evolved the capacities we have for harm avoidance, the future would have been otherwise.
And you have to be very careful when you talk about future alterers.
Right.
Because what are you going to change the future from what to what?
Since it hasn't happened. But you can talk about what it would have been had I not evolved my, whatever it is I use to avoid harm. But, of course, the reply you get from people is, yes, but you're still saying that given the fact that I have evolved these things, given the condition in which I wake up this morning, and the way my brain is inclined to use these things, the future is inevitable, and my feeling that I need to... well, you certainly hear this as a reply,
You certainly do, but I'm going to say, what on earth do you mean my future is inevitable?
Well, that again, if you knew that an omniscient being could predict what's going to happen today, and there's no possibility that I will behave in a way that's going to change, that's going to falsify that prediction. That's what people mean.
Well, first of all, that would be true, if I understand you right, in an indeterministic universe too.
Well, no. In that universe, the omniscient being would do the calculation and go, I think this is going to happen, but whoa, caprice enters the picture magically.
No, the omniscient being is going to know the future.
Well, no, omniscient about the present, I mean, and the laws that govern the present.
So you mean a Laplacian demon?
Yeah, Laplacian, calculator. And then, but lo and behold, t plus 1 after the prediction is made, caprice enters the picture from we know not where. That's the traditional conception of free will. And people have to let go of that.
That's a traditional conception of free will.
Right.
And what I'm arguing is that it's gratuitous. It does not... The motivation people have imagined for it is simply mistaken. Allowing for quantum indeterminacy, or shall we call it Laplacian indeterminacy, does not give you any more powers, any more freedom, any more avoidability, any more evitability than you have in a deterministic world. It's just an illusion to think that it does.
Okay. You say in the book that, and this is maybe one example, but that free will lacks your conception of the kind of free will that's viable lacks some of the traditional properties associated with free will. Have we already covered all the traditional properties, or are there other things people are going to have to let go of?
I'll let other people make that calculation. I've tried. I mean, what I claim is that all the varieties of free will that are worth wanting, we can have in a deterministic world. That I can define varieties of free will that are incompatible with determinism, but they're pointless. They don't give you anything that matters. They don't give you. They aren't needed for moral responsibility. They aren't needed to give your life meaning. They are completely gratuitous. They're sort of bizarre metaphysical conceits. They don't pull their weight. You don't need them. Who cares?
Yeah. I mean, I have to admit, I've never been able to clearly conceive of free will, even though it feels like I have it. But if you try to draw a graph of it, you'll run into trouble. I mean, I can imagine determinism. I can imagine a determined system. I can kind of imagine a random one, although that's actually harder than it seems. But free will is a slightly fuzzy concept. On the issue of quantum physics, though, I wanted to raise it like a kind of a second dimension of quantum physics that might enter the picture. As I understand what you're saying about quantum physics and free will is you're kind of saying, I mean, first we should say that according to quantum physics, there is such a thing as truly indeterminate.
Yep.
At the quantum level, very microscopic level, things happen that you could not in principle predict, even if you had all the information in the physical universe.
That's right.
As Richard Feynman put it, nature herself does not know what she is going to do next.
Yep.
At the quantum level. And some people have tried to use that to bring free will into the picture because it is anti-deterministic. I think I agree with you that, look, lots of random fluctuations, even in the brain, if they're truly random, don't amount to what people usually mean by free will.
Good. So we don't need randomness, or at least randomness can't give us free will.
If it's true randomness, you would think not. On the other hand, I would say one thing about quantum physics is you can't really know if random is the right word if you don't know what's causing the thing. I mean...
Well, no, but that's what random means in quantum physics. No hidden variables.
Well, no hidden variables in the physical universe, right. But let me put it another way. I mean, in the quantum world, events happen for which there is no cause in the physical universe. I mean,
right? Which
is kind of weird. But let me bring up a different weird aspect of quantum physics that may bear on free will. It's this business of the idea that the process of measurement or observation brings quantum reality into definite existence. Okay, that this is one interpretive. We're already getting into the interpretive part of quantum physics, of course. But
collapse of the wave packet.
Right.
Yes.
There are reputable physicists who say this, and there are two different ways to put it. One is that it's just that the quantum a quantum particle or whatever encounters a macroscopic measuring device, and that alone causes it to assume finite form. But some serious physicists think, no, you actually need a conscious being observing the measuring device to bring the thing into reality. Now, into fixed finite reality, if they're right, that would seem to me to open up the possibility of free will in a different sense. I mean, what they're saying is that there's something, we don't entirely understand about sentient being. I mean,
yes, I can see where you're going.
Okay.
And by wedding two bits of magic together, you're going to say it's not magic. By letting consciousness be a sort of mysterious and magical property, and saying that quantum enlargement, in effect, depends on consciousness, you nicely tie together two themes, and I think they're both. This is just magical thinking, and there's no reason to believe either side of it.
Okay.
That is. It's important to your view, as you just put it, that there be something really perplexing and mysterious about sentience, about consciousness. And I, of course, deny that.
Yeah, okay. Well, okay, we've gotten to the part of the discussion where I'm afraid we have to talk about consciousness.
No, I'm afraid so.
I always prefer to avoid this because you can talk about it for a long time without making any progress. It's that kind of subject. But since we do disagree about it, maybe we'll generate heat, if not light. And what you just alluded to, you just kind of called me a Mysterian. And in any event, you called me that in your last book, so it's an official it's an official allegation, which I actually don't really deny. I mean, a Mysterian in this context, at least as I understand it, is somebody who believes that consciousness is really mysterious. Now, first of all, by consciousness, I think we both mean basically sentience, subjective experience. So if I say I feel pain, that was the feeling was part of consciousness. I see the color blue, that's seeing, the experience of seeing that. And similarly, if you say, I think lizards feel pain, then you're attributing consciousness to lizards, okay?
Yeah.
I do believe it's mysterious in a couple of senses. There are, although I think science can tell us a lot about it, I think there are some fundamental questions about it that science may never answer. You think consciousness is more like just a puzzle. There are pieces to be worked out, details to be worked out, but we get the big picture. Now, let me try to characterize what you mean by consciousness, and you stop me when I start getting it wrong.
Okay.
I think you know where that will be. Okay, you believe that consciousness is a brain state, or is the brain, or is the state of the brain. And you don't just mean consciousness can be explained in terms of the state of the brain. I mean, I believe that, or at least I assume that. I don't really know what to think about consciousness, but it's certainly plausible to me that whenever I feel pain, you could point to the part of the brain that's causing that feeling. Whenever I see something, so that I could map my consciousness one-to-one onto my brain functioning. Okay, but that's not all you mean. When you say consciousness is the brain, you don't just mean consciousness is explicable in terms of the brain, right? I mean, one way you commonly hear this is, in other words, you're not just saying that. Well, let me stop there. Have I gotten it right so far?
Actually, you've put it in a slightly more extreme form than I myself would. That is a more simplified materialism than my own. When I say that my favorite metaphor these days is the fame in the brain, or cerebral celebrity theory, that what consciousness is the relative political influence or fame of structures in the brain that win out in competition against rival structures for domination of the brain's activities in various ways. That's putting it very programmatically. But basically it's saying that in your head there's a sort of turmoil going on, the pandemonium, and there's many different contentful events vying for king of the mountain, vying for control.
Okay.
And the ones that win, and by default, something always wins when you're awake, and that's what you're conscious of. And it's not that when it wins, then consciousness happens, or it kindles some further thing that's conscious. That's just what consciousness is. It's not as if an extra process has to happen. Winning, that's it. And then the next one that wins, then it's conscious. So, for instance, a robot that instantiated this sort of competition in its brain would be conscious. Absolutely.
Well, but we can build robots now that do these kinds of things, that have competition among theories about the world. Are you saying they're conscious?
They have the right sort of competitive structure, but there isn't the complexity there. I suppose in a little way they're conscious, but not in a very interesting way. It's the right sort of thing.
So there may be conscious computers right now, according to your view. You suppose there are, so there probably are conscious computers.
In the sense that extremely rudimentary versions of the architecture that I say consciousness exists, that's true.
Well,
But-
in
but
the
dude,
sense
but-
that, I mean, you're saying it's true then. I mean, you're saying according to your conception of what consciousness is, there are now conscious machines in the world.
Except that when I talk about consciousness, first of all, I talk about human consciousness, and I think human consciousness is very different from all other animal consciousness.
Sure.
And the level of complexity, just the informational
Right.
breadth
Right.
of the architecture of human consciousness is enormous. And a toy model of that, because it's a toy model, in a certain sense, isn't really an instantiation of consciousness. But if it could be scaled up, the answer would be yes. If it could be scaled up,
But
then
it hasn't been scaled up. So,
No, it hasn't.
So there aren't conscious
Right.
computers.
there aren't right now.
You're sure
But
of
there
that?
could be.
This leads
Yeah,
to...
there really could be, yes. Sure.
There may be.
Sure, in the future.
Oh. See, I
I mean, I'm sure there aren't now because I know the state of robotics research and I know the state of AI research. But some people are on the right track, and give them enough money and time, and yeah, there will be conscious robots.
yeah, no, I don't rule
Yeah.
out the possibility. And let me say
Yeah.
that this idea of kind of competing, competition within the brain, and the winner is conscious. I would certainly agree that could be the way that consciousness is shaped. But I would say that's the way the brain generates consciousness, and I think you would object to that.
Yeah,
because
it's that last step where you have to turn on the
Right.
magic projector and have this extra state created somewhere else. That's
No, it's
what
not
we don't.
created somewhere else. It's created in the brain.
Well, but
it's
that's-
different from. I mean,
Yeah.
let me.
See, that's where you're asking for there to be an extra shine or something that just doesn't need to
Okay,
exist.
we should bring in another term to make clear what you're not. The term is epiphenomenalist. An epiphenomenalist view of consciousness is that consciousness is generated by the brain, so the brain influences consciousness, but consciousness does not in turn influence the brain. So it's
anything. Doesn't
anything. Right.
Right. And that is one of the, to this day, I am flabbergasted that anybody takes this view seriously.
Right. That's not your view.
It certainly
let me
isn't.
just go on. I mean, epiphenomenalism is like...
It's insane.
So consciousness is to the brain the way a shadow is to my hand as I move my hand. No, that's what epiphenomenalism is.
Ah, thank you. That's what people think epiphenomenalism is, and it's not. Your shadow is perfectly visible. You can it has lots of effects in the world.
That part breaks down.
It has lots of effects in the world. There's a perfectly innocent notion of epiphenomenalism.
I understand that, but as my hand moves along, the shadow does not in turn affect my hand. I mean, see, it is a limited analogy, but the point is consciousness
is a limited and very
influenced by the brain, but does not in turn influence the brain. That is epiphenomenalism.
Well,
and you are not an epiphenomenalist.
Right, because epiphenomenalism is exactly as absurd as the following view. Are you ready?
Okay.
In every cylinder of every internal combustion engine, there are 7 epiphenomenal gremlins. They're caused by the action of the cylinder. They cause nothing in turn. They are undetectable by any machine, by any test. There couldn't be a gremlinometer. They don't add to the horsepower. They don't add to the weight. They don't add to the mass. They are completely epiphenomenal.
What bothers you is that in this view, in the epiphenomenalist view, consciousness cannot be detected.
No, that's the mistake. Because if that were true, then you wouldn't be an epiphenomenalist. Because if the fact that you're now telling me that you detect your consciousness is an effect of your detecting it, then your detecting it is an effect of the epiphenomenon, and that's ruled out by definition.
Well,
that's the trouble.
Now you've gotten it. That's an interesting.
That's the trouble with epiphenomenalism, is it's an incoherent view.
Okay, but here's the interesting thing. I've thought about this a lot lately. That in the human species, I mean, even if you're an epiphenomenalist in this sense, okay, you think when pain, subjective pain arose in a lizard or in a worm or whatever. Okay, let's go back millions and millions of years in natural selection. Subjective experience arose as an epiphenomenon, okay? And you can imagine that, right? You can imagine that a
No, I
worm has an
can't.
epiphenomenal consciousness.
No, I can't.
Why not?
Because I'll say it again slower, I guess. The very concept of epiphenomenalism, of effects that have no effects,
Yeah.
is completely unmotivatable. Always, always, always.
What does that mean?
It means, you agree, I think, that the view that there are 7 epiphenomenal gremlins in every cylinder is a view that is not to be taken seriously, right?
It doesn't seem likely to be true to me.
Well, compare it with that there's 6 epiphenomenal gremlins, or 3,
Equally
or 7.
implausible.
Not just implausible.
Right.
It's defined in such a way that you could never possibly have any reason to assert it.
So it's not amenable to scientific analysis.
No. It's worse than that. It's trivial in a certain way. There could be no motivation for asserting it.
If the engine said, I've got gremlins, I'd start taking it seriously. And that's what happens.
If the engine said, I've got gremlins, one thing you would know is it couldn't be saying this because it had gremlins. Because if there were gremlins, they wouldn't be causing it to say it, because that would be a contradiction.
My point. Your critique of epiphenomenalism does become relevant when you have organisms talking about their consciousness. But tell me how it doesn't make sense in an earthworm or a lizard. I say, look, the lizard, okay, it sticks out its paw into a fire and it retracts the paw.
Yeah.
Now, it feels pain at that moment. And I think the pain is an epiphenomenon, because what's really happening functionally that gets it to retract its paw is this physical information goes up and down, blah, blah, blah. Its feeling of pain is a kind of shadow of that. Now, why could that not be the case? Don't get into gremlins. Just tell me, in the case of the lizard, where is the logical contradiction there?
Well, because we don't know what you mean by its feeling pain in addition to the events going on. Maybe
it
just
pain
is.
Feels like. I assume lizards, if they feel pain, and you believe some non-human animals feel pain, feel something like it feels to us, okay?
But that doesn't get us.
We can't know, but
that doesn't get us to epiphenomenalism. It just gets us to sensation.
Well, right, but we're talking about a sensation that I'm positing is an epiphenomenon.
Well, but that's what we don't know what that means yet.
We do know what epiphenomenon means. It is caused by, but does not in turn influence.
Well, but let's then note that if it doesn't influence anything,
right,
then it doesn't influence the lizard.
Right.
So it doesn't, for instance, cause the lizard to believe it has pain.
No, lizards don't think about that kind of thing.
No, and so in fact, the lizard is completely clueless with regard. It is
the lizard,
and the lizard's own mental state is precisely as if it didn't have a sensation of pain.
No, its mental state is not.
Well, now you're contradicting yourself.
No, its mental state is the consciousness. Of course, its consciousness is influenced.
But now you're just helping yourself to dualism.
Well, epiphenomenalism is a kind of dualism. It's just not interactionist.
Well,
I mean, the causality moves in one direction with epiphenomenalism. I mean, where is the contradiction in the case of a lizard? It's true that once you get humans, consciousness does start influencing things, like it's the reason we're having this conversation. And that's an interesting fact. But if you go back earlier in evolutionary time, an epiphenomenalist view of consciousness is a coherent concept. And the fact that a consciousness that's originally epiphenomenal might later have an effect is an interesting fact with philosophical significance.
Well, I suppose it's also a coherent concept that that the pebbles on the beach feel they sense the gravity. They have this.
I don't know. I doubt they do. But the thing about consciousness.
Do you think that's a serious?
I call that highly unlikely. But the whole thing about consciousness is, and this is where, the thing about consciousness, it's one of those questions where two people disagree. It isn't just they disagree, they don't even understand each other. And this is where, this is a difference between you and people like me who have an alternative view. To us, an essential feature of consciousness is that no one other than the conscious being can ever verify the consciousness. It's an inherently private state, and that's one reason science may never penetrate it. Science studies publicly observable things.
If you define consciousness that way, then you get your conclusion in a single step, right? Science can't study it. But let me show you how I can define something the same way, too, which science can't study. And you tell me how your view differs. You know how naive Americans they go to Europe and they're asked how much something costs, and they're told so many euros. And they say, well, how much is that in real money? That is to say, in dollars. And they think, well, you know, dollars, there's a sense in which dollars have value, in which euros and, you know, Swiss francs and so forth don't really. I mean, they have relative value relative to dollars, but dollars have intrinsic value. Now, we say, no, dollars don't have intrinsic value. It's just the exchange for goods and services. It's not as if dollars have an intrinsic value that yen or euros don't have. And they say, no, I define the vis of a dollar as its intrinsic value. And I submit that economic theory cannot ever explain the intrinsic value of a dollar. And they're right. By definition, the intrinsic value of a dollar is something which is forever outside the purview of economics. The thing is, there's no reason to believe that dollars have intrinsic value. The fact that somebody in their gut has this deep-seated intuition that dollars have intrinsic value, well, that's an interesting fact about them, but it's nothing that science has to maybe explain why they have that weird hunch. But they don't have to explain the intrinsic value of a dollar, because there isn't any intrinsic value to a dollar. And similarly, I take on the burden of explaining why you have the intuition that you have, that this is what consciousness is. And I think I can give a pretty good explanation of why it seems that way to you. But you're just wrong.
No, I don't want to hear that.
I know you don't.
I mean,
that's
with the dollar. I mean, but in any event, why? I mean, there is an explanation about dollars, but let's not get into that. And why some people are confused about dollars. The relevance of that to your claim that I'm confused about consciousness is something I'm not completely clear on. But let me just tell you some things that you've said about consciousness that strike me as getting at the difference in the way we look at it. Okay. You've written that a chess-playing computer is, quote, manifestly not a conscious or self-conscious agent, unquote. How could you know for sure? I don't think they are conscious. I mean, I don't know. I doubt it. But how could you know for sure that that a computer is not having an internal subjective experience?
Well, because I have a view of consciousness as playing an important role. And I know everything that's playing an important role in that chess-playing computer, and there's nothing that's remotely like consciousness. Here's something it can't do. I'll give you a very simple thing. Mm-hmm. There's a joke line, a tagline. Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Right? You've heard that line. Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Rueful reflection of a person who's just come a cropper in some way. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that's actually a wonderful thing to be able to say and mean. If you can say and mean, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time, that means that you can recall how it seemed then, and recall how it seemed, and you can compare it to what you know now. Now, that's a level of self-knowledge and reflection and knowledge of your own past and of your own past thinking that's really potent. It's the key to debugging. It's the key to improving, to self-improvement.
Sure,
and
it's functional.
It's functional. That's a really big, important functionality.
Right.
Chess-playing computers don't have it.
Okay, well, neither do lizards.
If they did,
yeah, then they would have the experience.
Then I wouldn't be confident that they weren't conscious.
Okay, fine. Then they would have the experience of ruefulness. And
being able to reflect on their past
lizards
thoughts.
Presumably don't have ruefulness either, but
That's
you
right.
agree that lizards may experience pain. So why?
In one sense, in one sense, no. That is. I think it's. So I actually don't agree to any sort of categorical statement like that, because I don't think you or I have figured out what we jointly mean by that. I think this is one of the problems that people have with consciousness, is that they point to, they allude to supposed sensations, and they think they know what they mean. The famous phrase, "What is it like to be a bat?"
Thomas Nagel's phrase.
And I think in spite of the popularity of that phrase, it's a wild card. People don't know what they are agreeing to when they agree about the question that what we're going to talk about is, what is it like to be a bat?
Okay, but leave aside the details of what it's like to be something. You agree that it is like something to be you, right?
Yeah.
And that means you're conscious.
Yeah.
Okay, so that seems like a good working definition. And it leads me to something else you've written that points to kind of this difference of worldview. You write, quote, "Nagel claims that no amount of third-person knowledge could tell us what it is like to be a bat. And I flatly deny that claim." Now, you think that there is some amount of scientific study of bats and echolocation and everything else that could lead me to know exactly what it's like to be a bat?
Yeah.
To know it fully?
Yeah, as much, well, fully.
Well, Nagel would
diminishing
concede
diminishing
because we're talking about
returns.
it. Okay, so you can never know exactly, you agree you can never know exactly what it's like to be a bat?
You can never know exactly everything about a grain of sand.
Well, in principle
That's the only,
you could. In
no,
principle...
Everything? From the, everything about that grain of sand, from the Big Bang to the heat death of the universe?
Oh, the whole history of it?
That's
in principle, yes, you could follow the molecules.
Okay, then in principle you could know everything it's like to be a bat.
But you realize why most people think you just couldn't. I mean...
I realize that many people think you just couldn't, but I think that's a shibboleth. I think that's an intuition which is honored by tradition, but has nothing much going for it.
But you agree that I can never know really what it's like to be Dan Dennett?
No,
right?
I don't agree with that.
You think I can know fully, thoroughly, exactly what it's like to be you?
In principle, sure.
And what would that consist of? Me reading a lot of your descriptions of your...
Well...
Because, I mean, if there were some machine that could magically transport me into your frame of reference, so long as I felt like me looking at the world through your frame of reference, through your, perceptual lenses, I wouldn't know what it was like to be you. That would be like me, I mean...
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of us think consciousness is this inherently private thing that is just not amenable to scientific analysis in the way that a grain of sand... The thing about a grain of sand, whatever the extent to which we can know it, you and I can know it equally. Okay?
Yeah.
That's not true of your consciousness.
Well, it's circumstantially true that I know a lot more about what it's like to me than you do, because I hang around with me all the time. And
I would go further than that. I would say you are.
Well, no. In fact, that's not the point. The point is that somebody else, my wife, say, can know things about what it's like to be me that would never occur to me to reflect on. But she's right, I'm sure. And if it's a horrible thought, if a team of observers, they didn't just wire up my brain, but they hung around and asked me questions and watched and saw how I reacted to everything, and they were to study me much more intensively than I could ever study myself, they'd know more about what it's like to be me than I did. They could write a better encyclopedia of what it's like to be Dan Dennett than I could.
Well,
and they'd be getting at the innermost me. Now,
well,
the idea that you just can't do that. Well, so people say, but I just don't believe it.
Now, they could describe patterns in your behavior you're not aware of, even internal dynamics you're not aware of, but they could never know what it's like to be you, the way you can know what it's like to be you.
Says you.
Yeah.
But I don't take that as an axiom. I don't take that as a premise. And I think that the fact that philosophers in the past have tended to do that is a fascinating fact, but it doesn't persuade me that they were right.
Let me. This is a final quote of yours that I'll try to throw in your face and defy you to justify. Having so far, I've failed to get you to capitulate, and I don't think this is going to work either, to be perfectly honest. But you're talking about Mysterians. Mm-hmm. Some romantics, the philosopher Owen Flanagan calls them the new Mysterians, and as you subsequently said, I am kind of a Mysterian, have advanced the claim that there is an insurmountable barrier to the brain's understanding of its own organization. Mm-hmm. No, that's not what I believe. I believe I can understand my brain's physical organization completely, and I can understand your brain's physical organization completely in principle. Mm-hmm. I believe that consciousness is something more than the physical organization of the brain. And again, I'm not saying that the physical organization of the brain doesn't account completely for subjective experience. I'm just saying subjective experience is not the same. And we've already kind of established we can look at the organization of your brain. Everyone can gather around and look at it. We would not know what it's like to be you after we've done that.
There's a passage in your book where you say that the more Dennett and others say that consciousness is just an event going on in the brain, the more I come to realize that what they're really saying is that consciousness doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's a footnote of my book.
It's a footnote.
It's in Nonzero, but it's true that when I read quotes like the one I just read, where you seem to equate knowing about the consciousness of a being with knowing the organization of its brain, that I do start suspecting that. And you say things like you've said things to me like consciousness is the brain, or consciousness is the state of the brain. Well, if consciousness is the state of the brain, why come up with another word for it? I mean, I think we can talk about the state of the engine of my car, and if you said, well, let's use the word consciousness to mean that, I'd say, what do we need with a new word? I mean, it's...
We invent words for states and powers all the time.
Fine, but if you think you're not adding any meaning, see.
Oh well, we're adding meaning because it's the functionality and the organization of all of those states that makes the difference. And we can talk about which events you're conscious of and which you're not. Of course, we can say what difference that makes. We can talk about the efficacy, the functional roles that conscious events play that unconscious events don't. There's a lot of. It's a very useful term if you understand. If you don't define it in such a way that you whisk it off the stage of functionality altogether.
Right, but when you talk about the roles consciousness plays, the things consciousness does, you believe that in all those cases you could just substitute the workings of the brain and have the same statement, right?
It's just like life. I can talk about what life is on the planet, what life enables on the planet, and what the difference is between being alive and dead. But in every case, I could get rid of the word alive and just talk in terms of the functioning of the metabolism of the cells and the unity of the operations of the the coherence of the operations of self-preservation and so forth. And life isn't some other thing. It's not something over and above all those functional details. And I'm saying consciousness is just like life.
Well, that's what when I say it boils down to the question of whether you consider consciousness publicly observable or inherently private phenomena. That's kind of what divides us on this, and you and a lot of people. I mean,
I think it's not normally publicly observable in the same way that let's say that the metabolism of a person is. A lot of that's private too, but you can get out your
no, but you can in principle look at it.
Yeah.
And you say there are lots of states of things that we give new words to. Yes, but in all of those cases, no one disputes that in principle it's publicly observable. In this case, tons of people dispute that consciousness is publicly observable.
Well, all right,
and that's kind of the crux. And it's why, as is happening here, people who disagree fail to persuade each other. They just have a fundamentally different. It's almost at an intuitive level. So you want to call it a truce?
Probably we should call it a truce. Talk about something else.
Something else. Do you Do you manage to be a good person?
I think I'm.
In your objective judgment.
Well,
I mean,
like all the children in Lake Wobegon, I think I'm above average in morality.
Well, congratulations. Above average for a bright or for
no
you're about an
average. There's the things I've done that are wrong. I've got my little bits of guilty conscience, but I don't think I've done anything very, very bad. And I think I've done a lot of good.
I guess the question is, you don't see belief in God or even belief in any kind of higher power or even a belief in a transcendent foundation for morality. You don't see any of that. That's really necessary as far as creating good behavior.
Let's talk about transcendent and morality. One of the things that we have evolved to discover on this planet is arithmetic. We didn't invent it. We didn't make it. We found it. Mm-hmm. It is eternal, a priori, true. It's just great stuff. And it's true everywhere in the universe. It's true everywhere in any universe. There's only one arithmetic. Now, is that transcendent? I would say, yeah, that's, I don't know for sure what you mean by transcendent.
So it's kind of like a Platonic thing that was
it's sort of, yeah, it's this sort of Platonism.
And we happened upon its truth.
We've discovered it, and it's true. Now, could there be a sort of similarly Platonic ethics? Could we find the universal principles of good behavior for intelligent beings? I'm agnostic about that. I don't see why we couldn't. I don't see that the parochialism of our concerns would necessarily stand in the way of. I mean, we can ask the same question about ethics that we ask about arithmetic. If we went to another planet, if the search for intelligent life, extraterrestrial life that was intelligence, if this paid off, if we discovered another civilization somewhere in the galaxy that was intelligent, what would it share with us? Well, it would certainly share arithmetic. Maybe not base 10 arithmetic. That's anybody's guess. It might be base 12 or base 16 or base 8. Who knows? That's an accident. But it would still be arithmetic. Now, we can say, and would it share ethical principles with us? And I think, in some regards, yes, it would. Now, does that make those principles transcendent? Yeah. It's not might makes right, and it's not, this is what our grandfathers did, so this is what we're going to do. It's not just historical accident. I think that there could be a truly universal basis for ethics.
You mean to get to a point where any species could produce these great kind of collective products, which technologies and things are, they would have to come up with rules of the road for collaborative, cooperative interaction.
Sure.
Okay, and is that...
It's like the evolution of cooperation.
Right, yeah. Very much. Yeah. I mean, you could almost say that it's like a, I don't know, and I talked about this with Steve Pinker a little too, who discusses it in I think one of his books. I don't know if he used the phrase "strange attractor," but it's kind of like a truth that's out there.
It's an attractor,
that certain kinds of evolution are going to happen upon when they get in the vicinity. Now,
it's what I call a good trick with a capital G, capital T in Darwin's Dangerous Idea.
Right.
There are these good tricks of design which are going to be discovered again and again and again because they are the eternal good tricks. Arithmetic's one. Yeah. I think ethics is another.
Now, what if somebody noted this by way of suggesting that adds to the evidence that evolution had some purpose? If it naturally happens upon something that even you would agree is moral truth, okay? Natural selection is likely to produce a species that happens upon moral truth. Doesn't that lend credence to the argument that maybe there was some point to the whole exercise?
I don't think so.
No? I was kind of thinking you might say that. I don't know.
It just happens. And we can explain why it happens.
Does death bother you? You said that one definition of a Bright, this emerging interest group to which you proudly belong, is that they don't believe in life after death.
Yeah.
Is that Would you rather there were life after death?
No, I'd rather live to be 1,000. but
then if you died at 1,000, what would be your preferences for an afterlife?
I think the concept of an afterlife is a very useful fantasy for handling the grief of small children and others, and I don't disparage it. I think it takes a very strong and brave person to take on the task of comforting a child whose parent has just died, for instance, and the consolation value of believing that mommy's up there watching you is boy, that's a lifeboat in the storm, if ever there was one. It is so transparently useful at times like that,
Right.
that I dare say that is enough to explain its popularity as an idea for our species for all time.
Yeah. By the way, there is hope here. Here's a quote from actually a book called Consciousness Explained, written by you. If what you are is the program that runs on your brain's computer, then you could in principle survive the death of your body as intact as a program can survive the destruction of a computer on which it was created and first run.
Yeah. In fact, my friend Marvin Minsky has invested, I think, a large part of his Japan prize in the cryogenics contract of some sort, so that his body, or at least his brain, can be kept in cold storage against some imagined future time when he could be brought back to life, so that he could enjoy the 25th century science or something like that. And I appreciate the motivation for this. I suppose if I had a few million to burn, I might think of whether I might consider whether I would do that. The technology right now is nowhere near, and he knows that too. It's not in position now to make that a very realistic project. I think that it is just as likely that you could store all the information in your body. I can store it on a hard disk and then build another one sometime in the future, fixing just the parts that need fixing, and that would be a way of bringing you back to life.
Yeah, and as you may be alarmed to know, I don't know, but an actual theologian that I interviewed, John Polkinghorne, used this very type of scenario to assert that it's possible to believe in an afterlife even now. In other words, granting that the physical body dies, but he's saying if the essence of the self is a configuration of information, then for all we know...
there's a non-supernatural way you can believe in the afterlife. That's the path to immortality, if that's what you really want.
Oh, I definitely want it.
Well, I think the technology is going to be too late for you and me.
That's what I feared.
But if teleportation is possible at all, then as it were, eternal life is possible for the same reason. After all, the reason we die is that our parts break.
Well, if you get any insider information on this technology, you will drop me an email, won't you?
Well, I don't know. There may only be room for one or two of us in the machine.
Information is actually very cheap to replicate.
But it's extracting the information from the body. That's the hard part.
Yeah, I'll enjoy it then. I guess we've covered enough. We've gotten all the way to death, and if that's not a natural place to stop, I don't know what is. Thanks a lot. This has been fun.
It has been fun. Yeah, it's always a delight to see how you
defend indefensible positions.
How you defend indefensible positions. Well, what's interesting is that you and I we agree about so much.
It's true.
And then I see, by my lights, I see you going along just beautifully, and then suddenly you veer off to the side and think, wait a minute, where did that swerve come from? Must be free will.
There's no accounting for human behavior, as we know. Well, thanks a lot.
Okay.